Hey guys, tonight we sink our teeth into something sticky, shiny, and deceptively sweet. Because this story isn't about knights or kings, but about the stuff they definitely didn't eat. You're standing in the smoke, choked heart of Victorian London, where steam hisses, chimneys cough, and the air itself tastes like burnt toast and ambition. The year is somewhere around 1850, and you're hungry. Everyone is. Factories are booming. Bellies are rumbling. And your next meal might come wrapped in newspaper, sold by a man who hasn't washed his hands since Tuesday. And if you think you'd survive the street snacks of the era, you probably won't. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a narrow alleyway where the cobblestones glisten with last night's rain and something less poetic. Horse droppings, spilled beer, and the remnants of whatever snack the last passerby didn't finish. London's heart beats fast now, mechanical and human all at once. The factory whistle shrieks again, and a wave of tired, soot-coated workers pours into the street. They move like clockwork, clutching half pennies. Their thoughts fixed not on rest, but on food cheap enough to keep them standing through another shift. You can smell it before you see it. The hiss of hot oil, the sizzle of fat hitting iron. Fried eels twist in pans, potatoes bubble into greasy cakes. The vendors shout in rhythm, "Hot pies!" Fresh pies. Though fresh is a flexible word. You stop at a cart where a boy no older than 12 flips something golden. You squint. Is that meat? Possibly. Or maybe last night's leftovers ground together with bread dust and imagination. Victorian cities were built on that kind of imagination. How to turn almost nothing into something edible. Industrialization meant people crowded into cities faster than farms could feed them. In the early 1800s, more than half of Britain's population still lived rurally. By the century's end, over 75% lived in towns. The demand for quick, portable food skyrocketed. It wasn't about dining. It was about surviving the 12-hour day. Factories didn't just produce cloth and iron. They produced appetite. Hunger was the true engine of industry. Every whistle blast created thousands of tiny stomachs ready to trade health for speed. Imagine working 10, 12, sometimes 16 hours surrounded by noise and fumes, earning barely enough for bread and tea. You might dream of roast beef, but you'd settle for penny pudding. A mix of flour, water, sugar, and hope, steamed in scraps of tin. Historians still argue whether this was the birth of modern fast food or simply a desperate workaround for poverty. Either way, you can trace the greasy fingerprints straight to the birth of the working lunch. In one corner of the city, a woman ladles soup from a dented pot. It's labeled beef broth, but the only beef in it might be the name. The trick was in the seasoning, strong enough to mask the absence of meat. Salt and pepper became cheap magicians, turning murky water into something that felt nourishing. A mainstream fact for you during the 1850s, the average London labourer spent over half his income on food. Yet, despite that, malnutrition ran rampant. Cheapness was an illusion. Everything cost you, just not in coins. Now imagine the taste of adulteration, the Victorian food industry's open secret. To stretch flour, bakers added chalk or alum. To brighten sweets, they tossed in lead-based dyes. Even milk could be watered down until it was more river than cow. Pure became a quaint dream. And in this new industrial appetite, purity was bad for business. The air hums with a strange optimism, though. Machines roar, lights flicker, and progress feels unstoppable. Factories spew out both goods and illusions. If something comes from a machine, it must be modern, clean, advanced. You watch a man unbox shiny tins of biscuits marked Huntley and Palmer's, a respectable name. They gleam like treasure, each tin a promise of middle-class taste. Yet even these biscuits, mass-produced and uniform, are drenched in cheap sugar and palm oil imported by ships that also carried darker cargoes from colonies abroad. You wander toward the docks, where the smell of molasses hangs thick as smog. Ships from the West Indies and India unload crates of sugar, brown, sticky, addictive. A fringe tidbit. Some dockworkers used to scrape the crystallized syrup from the wooden beams and sell it by the handful. The empire's leftovers, repackaged for the hungry. As evening sets in, the streets glow orange with gaslight, and the city feels like a giant, wheezing animal. Children run barefoot past you, their mouths ringed in red from cheap raspberry candies that never met a raspberry in their life. They giggle, sugar, drunk and oblivious to the lead, chromate coloring working its quiet sabotage inside them. You turn down another alley where the sweet shop's window glitters with glass jars. Inside, the shopkeeper looks harmless enough. A grandmotherly face, soft voice, but her wares could kill a horse. Acid drops, peppermint lozenges, lemon sweets, all laced with dyes that modern chemists now recognize as poisonous. But in 1850, it was just good color. The brighter the better. And you can't blame people for craving color. The industrial world was grey, grimy, and metallic. Food was one of the few ways to taste joy. Every bite of sugar or spice was a rebellion against drudgery. You pop one into your mouth, just to see, and it melts into sweetness, then bitterness, then a faint metallic aftertaste. You swallow anyway. Overhead, a factory bell rings again, calling the night shift. The city doesn't sleep, it only shifts sides. You pass a bakery, still warm, where loaves sit in neat rows. A rat darts between your boots. The baker grins, wiping his hands on his apron. "Fresh bread," he says. You nod. He hands you a roll that smells heavenly, until you notice the fine white dust on its crust. It's not flour, it's chalk. Cheaper than grain, easier to mix, and guaranteed to keep the dough firm. You eat it anyway, because it's warm. One historian calls this era the chemistry of hunger. Everything edible became an experiment, and everyone was a participant. And yet, somehow, this chaos fed an empire. Workers powered machines, machines built railways. Railways delivered more cheap food. The loop was perfect. If you didn't mind the occasional death from copper sulfate in your pickles. You walk toward the Thames, its black surface catching the last of the light. The smell is unbearable. A mix of sewage, decay, and chemical runoff. People still fish here. They fry what they catch right on the bank, laughing, trading gossip. A woman offers you a fried whitebait. It crunches between your teeth. You think it tastes fine until your stomach clenches later, and you realize the fish might have been marinated in the river's own pollution. But tonight, you're not here to judge them. You're here to understand how entire populations survived on what was essentially edible deception. Cheap food wasn't a choice. It was destiny. Once machines started feeding people, flavor stopped being about pleasure. It became about endurance. There's something oddly comforting about that, though, how humanity keeps finding ways to keep moving forward, even on fumes. You see a small girl holding a sweet shaped like a heart. She smiles at you, teeth already yellowed by sugar and neglect. You smile back, because somehow she's still radiant in this soot-covered world. Above, the city lights flicker, and you imagine every window hiding a stomach growling for something easy, fast, and affordable. You think about the idea of junk food, not as a modern curse, but as a Victorian invention, a way of surviving progress. A train whistles in the distance. Steam curls into the cold night, carrying with it the scent of roasted chestnuts and coal. You breathe in deeply, and it burns your throat a little. Welcome to the industrial appetite. the world that learned how to feed itself poison and call it progress. And as you lean on the rail overlooking the smoky city, the hum of distant machines starts to sound almost like a lullaby. The next morning, you wake to the clang of carts on cobblestones and the clatter of spoons in teacups. London is already awake, has probably never slept. The air is sticky, faintly sweet, and sharp enough to sting your nose. It's sugar, though not the kind you'd find today in pastel cafes or Instagram desserts. This is the sugar of the Victorian era, raw, brown, half-refined, and utterly irresistible. It's in your tea, your bread, your medicine, even the ink on some labels. You step into the street, past a grocer's signboard scrawled with prices for West India sugar and cane loaf. The words themselves glisten with promise. Cheap sweetness for all. And you can almost hear the industrial heartbeat speeding up again. Refineries roaring near the Thames, steamships belching smoke. The entire empire humming with appetite. Victorians didn't just like sugar, they were transformed by it. Just a century earlier, it had been a luxury, reserved for aristocrats and apothecaries. A cube of it might have been displayed like jewelry. But by the mid-1800s, it had trickled down to every class, sweetening the tea of both duchesses and dockworkers alike. A mainstream historical fact. Per capita sugar consumption in Britain rose from roughly £4 per person in 1700 to over £90 by 1900. That's nearly a 100-fold increase. An empire built on sweet teeth and sore stomachs. You stop by a stall where a man in a suit, stained waistcoat sells cups of tea for a penny each. The liquid is nearly black, thick with tannin and, of course, sugar. The man grins. "Penny extra if you want it strong," he says, ladling another spoonful into your cup. You sip, and it hits you like a punch of warmth and syrup. There's comfort in it. And maybe a little danger. Historians still argue whether Britain's love of sugar was purely economic. Cheap calories for overworked bodies. Or emotional, a reward for endurance. A symbol of empire's success. Either way, the addiction was real. Factories ran on sugar as much as on coal. It fueled labor, soothed children, and masked the bitterness of poverty. For a working-class woman who skipped dinner to feed her family, a spoon of sugar stirred into hot water could mimic tea and stave off hunger for hours. They called it tea broth, a poor person's potion that tasted like hope. But sweetness always has a shadow. In the city's poorer districts, Limehouse, Whitechapel, Southwark, you'd find rows of children missing teeth before they'd reached adolescence. Dentists, still more craftsmen than doctors, pulled rotten teeth without anesthesia. Some kept drawers full of them, each a souvenir of progress. There's a fringe tidbit for you in some markets. People would sell their teeth to surgeons for dentures, a ghastly trade that sugar quietly made profitable. As you wander through the docks again, you notice the scale of the business. Mountains of raw cane, sticky and buzzing with flies, sit waiting for the crushers. Men with blackened hands feed the stalks into metal mouths that grind and spit juice into vats. The air hums with the smell, sweet but edged with decay. Workers, often Irish migrants or ex-sailors, earn barely enough to eat. The irony isn't lost on you. They drown in sugar, yet rarely taste sweetness themselves. Inside a warehouse, the syrup bubbles like molten amber. The overseer, wiping sweat from his brow, boasts that Britain refines more sugar than any other nation. Fuel for empire, he calls it proudly. He's not wrong. Sugar from the Caribbean, shipped by the ton, funded industries from textiles to railways. And behind every cube lay a story of exploitation too vast for polite conversation. You lean close to the vats and see something unsettling. Bits of fiber, soot, even the occasional insect trapped in the sticky swirl. Refining wasn't perfect science then. Filters were made from bone char, sometimes from animals, sometimes from, well, sources best not asked about. You step back, a little queasy. A delivery boy rushes past carrying crates marked treacle. He smells like caramel and sweat. Treacle, the thick, dark byproduct of sugar refining, became the poor man's syrup, slathered on bread or stirred into oatmeal. Mothers swore by it. Doctors even prescribed it as medicine for low spirits. It stuck to everything: fingers, hearts, imaginations. As evening draws near again, the city's sweetness turns heavy. You walk past a bakery window glowing golden under gaslight. Inside, rows of sponge cakes, jam tarts, and biscuits glitter behind glass. They look heavenly, but they're also a trap. Refined flour, cheap lard, mountains of sugar, the holy trinity of quick calories. For a penny or two, you could taste luxury. For a lifetime, you could pay the price. A woman in a bonnet beside you sighs dreamily. The Queen eats cake every day, they say. She buys one. You can't blame her. When the world feels grey, a bite of sweetness is rebellion. Back in your tiny rented room, you unwrap your own treat. A slab of sticky toffee wrapped in paper. It clings to your fingers. You take a bite. The sugar rush hits first, bright and dizzying. Then comes the aftertaste, a faint bitterness, a metallic note, almost like iron. You realize it's been mixed with something. Perhaps molasses too impure, perhaps coloring meant to make it shine. Still, you finish it. Hunger always wins. You think of the empire's far-off plantations. Fields of cane rustling in the Caribbean breeze, worked by hands that never tasted the profits. You picture the long chains: slave labor turned indentured labor, overseers replaced by machines, and at the end of it all, a sweet spoon swirling in your cup. The Victorians told themselves this was progress. You can almost hear the echo. If something is this delicious, how could it be wrong? There's a saying that the British Empire was built on tea. And that's true, but only half the truth. The other half dissolved right into its sugar. Together they became the national ritual, the daily fix, the silent addiction. A street preacher yells nearby, warning that sugar is Satan's spice. People laugh at him, but you can't help wondering if he's half right. Already doctors were noting strange new illnesses: nervous weakness, palpitations, melancholia. They didn't yet know about blood sugar or insulin, but they knew that sweetness carried a price. You glance again at your empty wrapper and think about how modern the pattern feels. Cheap pleasure, fleeting satisfaction, lingering harm, a whisper of de-age view from your own century. The rain begins to fall again, soft and slow. It slicks the streets, turning spilled syrup into golden rivulets that glimmer under gaslight. You step carefully, feeling your boots stick just slightly with every step. It's like walking on sweetness itself. Beautiful, irresistible, impossible to escape. And somewhere in the distance, you hear the steady beat of machinery and the soft hum of a lullaby sung by a mother sweetening her child's porridge. The city is still hungry, and sugar, this quiet, crystalline tyrant, has only just begun its reign. You wake before dawn this time, stirred by the sound of wheels grinding against cobblestones, and the faint chorus of market sellers setting up their stalls. The fog outside your window looks heavier today, thicker, like the city's hiding something in its breath. You step out, and the smell of yeast, coal smoke, and something vaguely chemical greets you. Welcome to Adulteration Alley, where every meal comes with a mystery ingredient. You wander through Smithfield Market, dodging carts loaded with bread, meat, and barrels labelled fine flour. The men unloading them look half asleep, yawning through the motions. But there's tension in the air too. A quiet awareness that what's inside those barrels might not be what it claims to be. You pause by a baker's stall where the loaves gleam pale and smooth. The man behind the counter grins proudly. "Best bread in London," he says, thumping one loaf like a showman testing a melon. You buy one, still warm. The crust feels light, almost too perfect. You break it open and notice something oddsy. It doesn't crumble. Instead, it tears like soft clay. You sniff, faintly metallic. The truth is chalk, white, literally. Victorian bakers learned that mixing alum or powdered chalk with flour made loaves whiter, firmer, and cheaper. A mainstream historical fact by mid-century. Tests showed that more than half the bread sold in London contained these adulterants. Bread became less food and more chemistry experiment. And this wasn't limited to bread. The same inventive dishonesty spread across everything that could be sold by weight, color, or scent. Coffee was often bulked out with roasted acorns or ground beans. Pepper might contain crushed olive stones. Cocoa could be padded with brick dust, ground so fine you'd never notice until your stomach began to ache. The city's food was a magician's trick, convincing, but dangerous. You stop next at a grocer's stall stacked with vibrant sweets, emerald, green bonbons, lemon drops glowing like sunlight, and scarlet ribbons of sugar candy. The colors are so bright they almost hum in the mist. But you know now, what gives them that glow? Copper arsenite for green, lead chromate for yellow, mercury sulfide for red. The Victorians ate rainbows long before anyone warned them that some colors bite back. A fringe tidbit in 1858. Hundreds of people in Bradford fell violently ill after eating peppermint lozenges made with arsenic-laced daff powder, a cheap filler mistaken for gypsum. 21 died. The event shocked the public and finally spurred investigations into food safety. Still, for most Londoners, those dangers were an accepted risk, just another roll of the daily dice. As you walk deeper into the market, you hear a woman shouting, "Best pickles in the borough." You turn to see jars stacked high, the brine inside glowing a near neon green. They look too vivid. You dip your finger to taste, sharp, tangy, and oddly metallic. Copper sulfate again. Used to make vegetables look fresh long after they should have spoiled. You put the jar down quickly, tongue tingling. Historians still argue whether adulteration was driven by greed or necessity. Was it heartless fraud, or just survival under capitalism's early grind? A small grocer could either cheat or starve, and the competition was ruthless. After all, customers wanted their bread white, their candies bright, their pickles crisp. And if you didn't deliver, someone else would, with less conscience and a cheaper recipe. You drift toward a stall selling milk by the pint. A boy dips a tin ladle into a pale bucket and pours you a glass. It looks normal enough until you take a sip. It's thin, watery, faintly sour. In truth, most milk in the city was extended with water, and often that water came straight from the Thames. To give it back some color and thickness, sellers stirred in flour or chalk. Babies died by the hundreds from what newspapers began calling the white poison. You hand the cup back quietly and keep walking. Every step feels heavier now, as though the city itself is weighted with invisible toxins. Even the air tastes wrong, a reminder that pollution doesn't stop at the lungs. In the distance, you see a man standing atop a wooden crate, waving a pamphlet. "The Lancet Commission," he cries, thrusting leaflets into curious hands. You take one. It's a report from 1855, an early exposé that revealed the shocking scope of adulteration in London's food supply. Chalk in flour, sand in sugar, red lead in cayenne pepper, each line more surreal than the last. Reading it feels like peeking into the backstage of a magic show you've long suspected was rigged. You slip the pamphlet into your pocket and follow the man as he marches through the market, shouting for reform. Some laugh, some nod. Most keep selling. After all, awareness doesn't fill stomachs. By afternoon, the fog thickens, and the smell of fish mingles with the sourness of vinegar. A fishmonger offers you a fresh fillet that gleams unnaturally silver. Preserved for your safety, he assures. You know better. It's brushed with mercuric chloride, a common preservative of the time. You walk away before your curiosity gets the better of you. Later, In a nearby pub, you sit nursing a mug of cheap ale. The foam looks oddly stable, like it's been stiffened somehow. Probably it has. Brewers often added isinglass or even chemical stabilizers to keep their beer appealing. You take a cautious sip. It's bitter, strong, and just a bit soapy. The man beside you laughs. "Don't worry, mate. It's all part of the charm." He grins, revealing a smile missing 2 teeth. You smile back weakly. As evening approaches, you step outside again. The rain begins, fine, misty, relentless. It washes the market stalls clean, but can't rinse the truth away. You pass the bakery again. The same man waves cheerfully, flour dusting his arms like snow. You think about his bread, his chalk, his alum, and realize he probably doesn't see himself as a villain. He's feeding families. He's part of a machine bigger than guilt. You stop by a dimly lit bookshop, drawn by the smell of ink and damp paper. Inside, a pamphlet catches your eye. The Chemistry of Common Life. The author, James F.W. Johnston, was one of the first to argue that modern food chemistry was both marvel and menace. "We have learned to feed multitudes," he wrote, "but forgotten how to nourish them." You trace the words slowly with your thumb. Outside, thunder rolls faintly over the city. The sound echoes through the narrow lanes, as though London itself is clearing its throat. You picture the millions of lives depending on those tainted loaves, those glittering sweets. The empire's heart beats faster, fueled by cheap calories and cheaper conscience. You walk home under flickering gaslights, your boots splashing through puddles that gleam greenish in reflection, like the pickles earlier. The city is beautiful, even now, in its toxic glow, and as you pass one final stall selling penny cakes to a line of children, you realize that Victorian food wasn't about pleasure or even survival anymore. It was about illusion, about selling comfort in a form you could taste, even if it killed you slowly. Somewhere behind you, a baker laughs. Somewhere ahead, a chemist writes another formula, and between them both, the people of the city eat dinner and dream of sweetness they'll never afford again. You wake to the faint clatter of tins rolling off a cart. The smell that follows is sharp, metallic, and faintly sweet, like old pennies soaked in syrup. Somewhere nearby, someone's hammering lids shut, sealing meals inside tiny metal tombs. The sign above the warehouse door reads Fortnum and Mason Fine Preserves and Provisions. Inside, a new miracle of modern living is being born: canned food. You watch a young woman wipe sweat from her brow as she lifts a tray of gleaming tins, each stamped with an elegant label promising beef essence, potted game, or turtle soup. They shine like treasure, and in a way they are. Food that never rots, that can be shipped across oceans, stacked in soldiers' packs, and sold to families who no longer have time or space for fresh meals. It feels like alchemy. It is alchemy. The story begins decades earlier, when Napoleon Bonaparte offered a prize for anyone who could invent a way to preserve food for his armies. A Frenchman named Nicolas Appert answered the call, bottling cooked food in sealed jars. Britain, never one to resist a good idea, or a good empire, industrialized it. By the 1850s, tin was the new magic material. You could now open dinner with a chisel and a prayer. You wander through the warehouse, watching men soldering lids with molten lead. The smell is thick and nauseating. You realize that every seam of every tin likely carries a trace of that poison. The irony is staggering: food made safe by science, contaminated by the very tools that preserve it. A mainstream fact for you: soldiers in the Arctic expeditions of the 1840s suffered mysterious ailments, later traced to lead poisoning from their canned rations. But in London, few questioned such details. If it looked clean, it must be good. You lift one tin and read its label aloud: calf's head soup. The words sound both luxurious and suspicious. "Don't worry," says a clerk nearby, smiling proudly. "It'll last forever." You smile back, unsure whether that's a boast or a warning. The genius of the can wasn't just preservation, it was transformation. Suddenly, class boundaries blurred ever so slightly. What used to be the food of the wealthy, meats, fruits, exotic soups, could be imitated for the masses. Never mind that the contents might be mostly gristle and starch. The label did the dreaming. You could buy a taste of luxury, sealed in tin, for $1. Historians still argue whether canned food truly democratized eating or merely industrialized deception. You imagine both are true. Outside the factory, a peddler hawks tins to passing housewives, demonstrating how easily they open with his new patented key. The women watch, impressed. Inside the open tin, however, the meat looks greyish and dry. One pokes it with a fork. Smells strong, she mutters. The peddler laughs nervously. That's just the preserving liquor, ma'am. In your mind, you picture rows of London cupboards filled with these little silver promises. Ready meals before microwaves, hope in metal form. Housewives loved them. Servants feared them. Sailors depended on them. Canned goods represented progress, but progress always comes with a price tag in invisible ink. You make your way to the docks again, where crates stamped Sando Oysters USA are being unloaded. Imported? The empire feeds itself from everywhere now. Inside a nearby tavern, sailors pry open tins with knives and devour the contents cold. Better than ship's biscuit, one says, wiping grease from his chin. You take a bite of your own can of minced mutton. It's fine, until a hint of tin floods your tongue. You stop chewing. A fringe tidbit in those days, spoiled canned food could, and often did, explode. Without refrigeration or perfect sealing, fermentation built up gas pressure until tins burst open like tiny bombs. Markets were sometimes littered with the splattered remains of preserved meats that had preserved themselves a bit too enthusiastically. You wander further and find a military supply store, stacked high with identical tins, bound for the Crimean front. The clerk boasts that these rations will feed the Empire's sons wherever they go. The irony is that more soldiers would die of bad food than of bullets. Some tins arrived spoiled, others undercooked before sealing, breeding deadly botulism long before anyone understood microbes. And yet, despite the danger, people trusted it. Progress had a flavor, and it tasted metallic but modern. Housewives could now plan meals without worrying about rot. The dream of permanence had entered the kitchen. You pause by a narrow alley where children scavenge empty tins, turning them into toys. One little boy clinks his tin against the ground, pretending it's a drum. You can almost see the poetry in it. Something that once promised sustenance, now echoing hollowly through the street. By afternoon, the city grows warmer, and the smell of preserved goods becomes thick, cloying. You pass a shop window advertising, imported pineapple, canned. You blink. Pineapple in London. You step inside, pay a small fortune, and the shopkeeper opens the can for you with exaggerated ceremony. The syrup glistens like gold. You spear a piece with a fork and take a bite. It's soft, almost flavorless, the sweetness dull and distant. You chew, realizing you've just eaten the empire itself, boiled and boxed for convenience. Outside, a woman sells home canned jam at a corner stall. She beams proudly, calling herself modern. The irony is that while her jam might actually be pure, the reputation of all preserved food was already tangled in mistrust. Housewives learn to sniff, to prod, to watch for bulging tins, small domestic rituals of suspicion. Historians still debate whether early canning companies knew about the contamination or simply didn't care. Some letters from factory inspectors survive, warning that lead fumes filled the workshops. Others insist the doses were harmless. The truth lies somewhere between negligence and ignorance, a grey zone, like the colour of the canned meat itself. As dusk settles, you find yourself back near the Thames, where heaps of discarded tins gleam in the gaslight. They look like treasure at first, silver mounds scattered among the trash. But as you walk closer, you notice their jagged edges, their sharpness. The promise of industrial food was like that, gleaming beautiful and dangerous to hold for too long. You sit by the river's edge and watch a barge pass, carrying crates toward another port, another hungry city. Somewhere in those boxes, a child's dinner rattles quietly inside its can, waiting to be opened months later with a dull blade. You think back to the open markets of only a generation ago. Fresh produce, butchered meats, bread that still smelled of yeast. All of it perishable, yes, but alive. Now, food feels sterile, lifeless, embalmed in tin and syrup. The factory whistle blows again, and a new shift begins. Inside, men work under flickering lamps, sealing the next batch of eternity. The sound of hissing steam and hammering lids blends into a strange rhythm, almost soothing. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the heartbeat of progress, and for the briefest second, you believe in it. The illusion of safety, the dream of plenty. Then you open your eyes and see the label on a nearby crate, preserved humanity. It's meant as a joke, a wink from one worker to another, but you can't help feeling that it's the truest label in the room. Night falls heavy over London. The lamps hiss, and the fog folds in thick and low, curling around the narrow streets like damp wool. You walk toward a district that smells of ink and scorched oil, where printing presses thrum like machines with lungs. Here, in the heart of Fleet Street, a new empire hums quietly, not one of kings or soldiers, but of words. The building you enter trembles with the rhythm of progress. Wooden floors shake under the weight of the press. Great iron beasts churning out sheets of paper faster than the eye can follow. This is the world of the penny press, and it is revolution disguised as journalism. Once, news was for the rich, sold by subscription, read in drawing rooms, printed with restraint. Now, for a single copper penny, anyone, dock worker, maid, or street urchin, can hold the world in their hands. The age of information has begun, though few yet understand what that means. You pass a boy, no more than 10, his arms full of freshly inked pages.
"Murder on the Strand!"
he cries, his voice cutting through the night like a bladed.
"Read all about it!"
Terrible crime in Whitechapel. The people gather, faces half hidden in the fog, hungry for details. They hand over their pennies, the boy's fingers blackened with ink. The sheet you take is still warm. Across the top, bold letter screams, THM star SAGIN. No author, no restraint, just panic in print. Sensation sells, and in these streets, sensation has no moral compass. You unfold the paper. The headline fills the page, but the facts are thin. A woman found dead. A mysterious shadow seen in an alley. You realize the article is half speculation, half poetry. But it doesn't matter. Truth is no longer the product. Emotion is. Around you, the city's pulse quickens. The penny papers have turned rumor into industry. Every tragedy becomes a commodity, every whisper a headline. It's a kind of alchemy, just like the canned food factory. But this time, the raw material is human fear. You wander deeper into the print shop. The air is thick with ink and ambition. One man, his sleeves rolled up to the elbow, oversees the press. His name is Mr. Harcourt, editor of the Illustrated News. "We're feeding the masses," he says proudly, watching the pages pour out. They crave stories. Give them enough of them, and they'll never stop reading. You ask if he worries about truth. He laughs. "Truth," he says. "Truth doesn't sell. But outrage never spoils." The press slams down again, a thunderclap of steel. You imagine the sheets flying into the night like black and white moths, each carrying a fragment of someone's life, distorted just enough to gleam. A fringe tidbit. It said that the ink used in cheap presses was sometimes mixed with whale oil and soot. The papers left your hands greasy. smudging fingertips like crime itself. Readers joked that news was dirty work. They weren't wrong. Outside, the newsboys scatter, their cries echoing through the fog. Scandal in Parliament?
The Great Train Robbery! Ghost found in a churchyard!
Each headline competes for attention, a chorus of chaos. You follow one boy down the street, watching as he tosses unsold papers into a puddle. The ink bleeds, words dissolving into black water, like truth itself, seeping away. You can almost feel history shifting under your feet. For the first time, everyone has access to a version of reality, and each version is for sale. Back inside the press room, a young woman types on a linotype machine, her fingers flying over the keys. You ask what she's writing. A serialized romance, she says without looking up. A Duke, a lost letter, a forbidden kiss. It's not real, but no one cares. They read it on the omnibus, cry a little, and come back tomorrow for the next part. Her eyes flick up briefly. Sometimes I wonder if I'm printing dreams or lies. The machine clatters on. Somewhere in the back, an apprentice wipes excess ink from a roller. You watch as he leaves black fingerprints on his shirt, a strange mark of devotion to the god of modernity. Out on Fleet Street, posters are being pasted to brick walls. NEWCRILBYCHROSTKENS. THEOLD Corosa TSOP. Crowds gather even before dawn to buy each installment. When a beloved character dies, grown men weep openly in the street. Literature, once locked in libraries, now lives in alleyways and train stations. It's a democratization of feeling. Mass empathy printed by the ton. You can't help but be moved by it. The same presses that spread fear also spread hope. Satire, reform. Words become weapons and lanterns both. You step outside, watching a young man read aloud to a group of factory girls during their break. His voice trembles as he reaches the end of a story about a poor orphan finding redemption. The girls clap softly, faces bright even in the suit. This is the power of cheap ink, binding strangers through imagination. But not everyone welcomes it. Up the hill, the respectable gentlemen of society fret. The lower classes are reading too much. One laments in his club. It fills their heads with dangerous ideas. Ideas like equality. Ideas like justice. Ideas like freedom. You realize, walking through the fog, that every new invention, the castle's keep, the cannon, the press, has always been about control. Protecting, preserving, shaping. The printing press, though, has no gate. Once unleashed, it can't be contained. A fringe tidbit floats to mind in the 1850s. Entire crowds gathered around street lamps at night to read newspapers aloud to each other, because most couldn't afford their own copies. Literacy became a social act, a rebellion disguised as pastime. You turn down a narrow alley where someone's painted graffiti on a wall, crude but defiant, KNOLODG, ice puar. The paint drips like blood. By dawn, the presses are still running. The smell of ink never fades. It seeps into your clothes, your hair. You think of all the words still waiting to be printed. The revolutions they'll ignite, the hearts they'll break, the lies they'll tell. And as the first rays of morning strike the windows, you finally understand the printed page is the new fortress. Not made of stone or steel, but of sentences, built to defend ideas instead of bodies. You stand at the threshold of the modern mind, and the ink beneath your fingertips feels warm, almost alive. The smell reaches you before the sound does. A sweet, heavy perfume of fried oil, sugar, and smoke rolling down a narrow street in Whitechapel. It's evening again, and the city hums with hunger. You follow your nose past laundry lines, shouting vendors, and the clatter of cartwheels, until you find the source a line of street carts, each one a tiny world of sizzling food and fleeting fortune. A woman in a shawl stands behind one cart, her hands moving fast and practiced. She dips thin slices of potato into a bubbling vat of tallow. The air pops and hisses as she lifts them out, golden and curling, tossing a pinch of salt over the batch before wrapping them in yesterday's newspaper.
Hot taters!
"A penny a portion?" she calls. You take a step closer. The warmth of the fryer cuts through the night chill, and your stomach responds before your mind does. For the working poor, this is dinner. Cheap, fast, and filling. The food might taste of grease and grit, but it's calories you can afford, and in Victorian London, calories mean survival. She smiles, handing you a paper cone. "Mind the oil," she warns. You bite in. It's crisp, comforting, maybe even addictive. But as the flavor fades, a faint metallic note lingers. A reminder that this feast comes with unseen costs. The oil, she admits, isn't fresh. It's reused from the day before. Maybe the week before, skimmed and strained but never replaced. There are rumors of worse, of oil reclaimed from candles or even slaughterhouses. Historians still argue whether such tales were urban myth or grim truth. Either way, the taste clings. You keep walking, the street alive with movement. Vendors call out in a dozen accents: Irish, Cockney, Welsh, Italian. The city is a melting pot, and the pots literally melt. You pass carts selling fried eels, pea soup, meat pies, and something called sheep's trotters on toast. Steam rises in twisting columns, blurring the faces of the cooks. Everywhere, money and appetite trade hands in small, greasy coins. A worker fresh from the dock slaps one down for a cup of tea so black it looks like ink. He gulps it with shaking hands, muttering about the foreman's temper. Another man buys a handful of roasted chestnuts for his daughter, her fingers too small to hold them all at once. A mother with soot on her cheek breaks a potato cake in half and whispers, "One bite each." Love. The sound of frying is hypnotic. Hiss, crackle, pop, the lullaby of the industrial age. You find a cart selling gingerbread men, the kind shaped like stout little fellows with currant eyes. The vendor's sign says,
"2 a penny! Best in London!"
You try one, and the texture surprises you. Dense, sticky, almost sandy. He laughs. "Bit-o alum in there." Keeps him firm. You blink. Alum. "The same chemical used to tan leather. Don't worry," he says, reading your expression. "It's what keeps the dough bright and tight. You'll live." He's probably right. Probably. A quirky fact drifts through your mind many of these street foods. The chips, the meat pies, the fried fish would later become Britain's national dishes. But here, in their infancy, they were survival snacks for the poor, made with scraps, boiled bones, and borrowed grease. Civilization, it seems, often starts in a frying pan. You move toward another stall, this one glowing with soft yellow light. A girl no older than 15 stirs a pot of sugar candy, ribbons of molten syrup twisting into glassy strands. She spins them around sticks, dips them in crushed ginger, and sells them to a crowd of factory boys who lick them like treasure. The syrup splatters across her hands, burning tiny welts into her skin. She doesn't flinch. "Burns don't hurt as much when you're hungry," she murmurs. You hand her a coin and take a candy stick. It's sweet beyond reason, almost medicinal in its sharpness. For a moment, it feels like sunlight on your tongue. Then your teeth ache. The sugar rush fades fast, leaving you hollow again, like the echo of joy after laughter. A man in a threadbare coat leans against a lamppost nearby, reading aloud from a newspaper article about food adulteration. He waves it like a flag. "They're killing us with this muck," he shouts. Copper in the pickles, chalk in the flour, poison in the sweets. A few passers-by jeer. Others nod solemnly. Historians still argue whether he was right. You think, but the fear in their faces says they already know. You notice a pair of constables watching from across the street. They don't interfere. The poor must eat what they can, and the law, as usual, moves slower than hunger. Farther down the lane, you find something almost comical. A man selling American popcorn from a tin drum. shouting about its magical lightness. It's a novelty then, imported through the docks, flavored with molasses instead of butter. Kids gather around, laughing as the kernels explode from the drum like tiny fireworks. You realize it's not just food being sold. It's escape, a small, crunchy piece of wonder in a world of soot. But even the fun has its shadows. You overhear a mother bargaining with a seller over a bag of toffee bits. She finally pays, then breaks off a piece for her child. It shatters like glass. Later, you'll learn that many toffees were mixed with cheap fillers like plaster or potato flour to bulk them out. They sparkled because of lead-based colorants. Beauty, once again, at a deadly price. The night deepens. Rain begins to fall, light and silvery, turning the cobbles slick. Yet the food carts burn on like lanterns of defiance. You stand under a tattered awning, watching smoke curl toward the rooftops. It's almost beautiful. The reflection of flames in puddles, the laughter, the brief illusion of comfort. A young man settles up beside you, biting into a fried pie. "Best thing you'll ever eat," he says proudly, handing you one. The crust is hot, flaky, oily. The filling tastes like spiced meat, until you realize it's mostly suet and gravy. You ask what kind of meat it is. He shrugs. Could be beef. Could be rat. Depends on the day. You choke on a laugh, but he's serious. Rats are plentiful and free. The city adapts. Survival becomes cuisine. Somewhere behind you, a church bell rings midnight. The vendors start packing up, scraping grease into jars, covering their carts with tarps. The rain washes the streets clean for a few hours, until morning hunger begins again. You think about what you've just seen: the chaos, the color, the resilience. These food sellers, many of them women, are the beating heart of Victorian survival. They live on the edge of legality and respectability, feeding a city that barely notices them. Yet their frying pans and toffee molds shape the very soul of the streets. As you walk away, the smell of oil and sugar clings to your clothes. It's not unpleasant, just real. The scent of life lived too fast and too hard. You can't help but wonder, in another century, will people look back at our snacks, our brightly packaged crisps and microwave meals, and see the same desperation hiding under convenience? Historians still argue whether Victorian street food saved lives or slowly destroyed them. Maybe it did both. Maybe it always does. Somewhere behind you, a new cart clatters open, its owner lighting a flame against the rain.
"Hot pies!"
She calls.
"Best you'll ever taste!"
And despite everything, people come running. You wake to the rhythmic clang of factory machinery and the sweet, thick aroma of molasses. London is alive, breathing through smokestacks, sweating through workshops, and, most insidiously, feeding through sugar. Today, you follow the trail of sweet drinks, a concoction empire that had barely begun to thicken the blood of the nation. The streets are already crowded. You pass a soda fountain where a young man pours fizzy water over syrupy fruit extracts, creating a frothy concoction the locals call fruit lemonade. The beverage gleams like liquid gold, sparkling in the early sunlight. For a penny, anyone can sip the new joy of effervescence, and for a moment, the world seems to float a little lighter. You take a cautious sip. Sweetness explodes across your tongue, carbonated bubbles fizzing and popping. The flavor is intense, artificial, more color and sugar than fruit, but utterly convincing. The soda seller grins. "We make it strong, sir. Makes the day taste brighter." You realize he's right, it does. For an hour or two, the world is cheerful, innocent, and easy. But the price of that happiness is hidden. The syrup, thick and gleaming, contains more sugar than any stomach can safely tolerate, and sometimes a trace of lead to give it color and shine. A mainstream historical fact, chemists of the time discovered that many colored syrups contained toxic minerals. Yet no legislation existed to stop it until the very end of the century. And yet the drinks flowed freely, an elixir of delight and danger. Walking further, you pass a crowded pub where men sip ginger beer from stoneware mugs. The beverage tastes sharp, slightly fermented. The brewery runs cheaply. Some brewers even skip pasteurization, leaving the drink alive with yeasts that could wreak havoc on weaker stomachs. You remember reading that children often got sick from ginger beer, though the bright fizz and warming spice made them crave it anyway. Historians still argue whether the industrialization of sweet drinks accelerated dental decay, or if diet alone was to blame. Looking around, it's hard to see a child in the crowd with more than a few healthy teeth. You watch a boy bite into a sugar-stained biscuit and wince. One day, that gap-toothed grin might become permanent. You wander to a corner where a woman mixes a dark, sticky concoction called treacle beer. She stirs the thick liquid, letting the black syrup slide slowly back into the bucket. It smells like burnt sugar and caramelized molasses, sticky and sweet, comforting and strange all at once. Children tug at her skirt, begging for a taste. She smiles, handing a small cup to each one. "Just a sip," she says. "Keeps your belly warm." A quirky fact drifts to your mind. Treacle, once considered medicine for weak nerves, was now a staple in children's drinks, puddings, and pies. It was sold in pharmacies and grocers alike, disguised as nourishment, often sweetened beyond recognition. Parents trusted it without question, and why wouldn't they? It smelled like home. The alleyways are lined with vendors, each selling variations: orangeade, sarsaparilla, barley water, lemonade with a kick of quinine. They shout over one another, advertising purity and health, though the reality is often grim. Quinine, for example, is bitter and medicinal, but enough sugar disguises it. One sip can mask the taste of poison, or of a poorly digested stomach lining. You pause at a soda siphon, watching the young man operate the nozzle with precise hisses and spurts. He fills glasses for a line of waiting women. The liquid shines like jewels in the sunlight. Some fizz spills over the edges, leaving sticky trails on their hands and sleeves. They don't care. The pleasure of sugar outweighs the mess, as it always does. In your pocket, a small pamphlet flutters. The first public warnings about sugar, sweetened drinks, published in 1869, they caution against excessive consumption and warn of eruptive fevers, wasting teeth, and general debility. People mostly ignore it. Advice without convenience is invisible. You notice a young boy slipping coins from the pocket of his worn coat into the palm of a vendor. He buys a sip of raspberry soda, then another. You wonder if he knows about the teeth he's sacrificing for the momentary buzz of flavor. Probably not. Hunger and pleasure are too immediate. A fringe tidbit: in some districts, soda vendors would spike drinks with small amounts of opiates or sedatives to calm children, quiet neighbors, or encourage repeat business. It's subtle, almost invisible, but present in whispers. You shiver slightly, imagining the tiny, sweet narcotics sliding down throats like invisible sugar, coated lies. The streets are noisy with laughter and chatter, but beneath it, there's a quiet, creeping consequence. Teeth turn black, gums bleed, bellies ache, yet still every vendor you pass calls out, "Drink up." It's cheap and bright. You taste the optimism yourself. It sticks to your tongue like syrup. You continue past a small chemist shop where bottled syrups sit in neat rows. Cherry, elderflower, sarsaparilla. Each promises health, vigor, and flavor. Some contain real fruit, many more contain only sugar, water, and color. And still, for the Victorian consumer, they taste like magic. By twilight, the city is glowing under the last of the gas lamps. You follow a crowd toward a street corner, where a boy balances a crate of sodas on his head. He trips. Bottles clatter, some break, syrup spilling into the gutters. People laugh and scrape it up with fingers, licking the sweetness off the cobbles. It's desperation, and it's delight, mingled. As you walk home, The stickiness of sugar clings to your clothes and hair. You think of the streets, the children, the endless fizzing bottles and bubbling vats. Sugar has become a language, a way to communicate comfort, status, survival. Every sip, every bite, writes a small story on your body and your mind. The fog thickens again, curling around your ankles. Somewhere, a vendor calls one last time,
Lemonade! Ginger beer!
sweet relief for all. And for a moment, it feels as though the city itself is alive, pulsing with the heartbeat of sugar and soda, sweet, deceptive, and utterly irresistible. Morning comes slow, with drizzle smearing the gaslight reflections on wet cobblestones. You wander toward the confectioner's quarter, a neighborhood perfumed by caramel, chocolate, and the faintly acrid tang of burnt sugar. Here, the Victorians' love for sweets reveals itself in full force: delicate pastries, marzipan, candied fruits, and chocolate bars the size of a child's palm. The air is dizzying, and your senses reel. You pause before a small shop, its windows fogged and glowing amber. A sign above reads Maison du Sucre. Inside, a woman dressed in a spotless apron dusts powdered sugar over eclairs that gleam like polished amber. Her hands are nimble, moving in rhythms that speak of practice, pride, and exhaustion. Each confection is a miniature monument of sweetness, promising joy, if only for a moment. Chocolate has recently become a sensation. Imported from the Caribbean and tempered in London workshops, it's no longer a bitter drink for the elite. Now it is molded, sweetened, and mass-produced. A mainstream historical fact, by 1868, the British chocolate industry had begun to mechanize, producing solid chocolate bars affordable to the middle classes. What once required skill and leisure now fits neatly into a pocket or a child's lunch. You buy a small bar, biting into it with curiosity. The texture is gritty, sugar crunching against your teeth, and the flavor bursts forward. Cocoa is strong, but the sweetness almost overwhelming. For a moment, it feels like decadence, indulgence, even rebellion. And maybe it is. But indulgence has a shadow. You notice a poster in the corner warning of candy poisoning. Not because of sugar itself, but because confectioners often used lead-based paints for candy colors, arsenic for greens, and other heavy metals to create brilliance. Children ate what they saw, not what they knew. Their teeth and stomachs paid the hidden price. A fringe tidbit drifts through your thoughts. Marzipan, often sold at fairs, was sometimes mixed with crushed almonds and a bit of chalk to bulk it out. It looked perfect, smelled sweet, and felt harmless. But you could taste the odd dryness in the back of your throat. People believed in its luxury without knowing the compromise. The streets are alive with vendors. You pass a cart stacked with sugar mice, tiny molded candies designed to amuse children. They're painted with bright red and green, the shine achieved through lead glaze. Kids point and squeal, tugging their parents' skirts, oblivious to the danger lurking beneath their shiny coats. You almost laugh at the absurdity. A man offers ginger lozenges on a tray. He tips the tray toward you. The smell of strong ginger and sugar stings your nose pleasantly. You take one. It's medicinal, sharp, and strangely satisfying. Parents claim it soothes colds. Doctors warn of overuse. You realize this pattern repeats sweetness as comfort, medicine, and deception, all rolled into one sticky package. You wander into a nearby alley where a young boy sells lollipops on the corner. They're enormous, swirled with color. He boasts that the red ones are made with real cherries. You smile politely, but you know the red dye is probably vermilion, containing mercury sulfide. The children don't care. They only see bright, spinning joy. Historians still argue whether Victorian candy truly caused widespread illness, or whether its dangers were exaggerated in later decades. Either way, the psychological effect is undeniable. Sweets became a reward, a comfort, and a symbol. Desire and danger are bound together in sticky ribbons. You notice a woman dusting powdered sugar onto rows of small almond cakes. Each one smells heavenly, tempting even the most disciplined passerby. She hums a tune as she works, a soft counterpoint to the clatter of the street. You realize that confectionery isn't just food. It's theater. Every swirl, glaze, and sprinkle is designed to lure, to charm, to captivate. Outside, a group of boys race past, candy in hand. One trips, dropping a bar that shatters on the cobblestones. You watch them scramble, retrieving shards with sticky fingers, laughing. The sweetness is fleeting, messy, and irrepressible, much like the city itself. A middle-aged man stops to offer you a taste of sugar, coated almonds, wrapped in twisted paper. He winks. "Try it, sir. It keeps your spirits up." You take one. Crunch, sugar, bitter almond. Delight mixed with fear, because you know the sweetness is almost certainly adulterated, and yet you cannot resist. By afternoon, the shops are busier. Upper-class children pass through on outings, their gloves dusted with sugar. Street children peer through windows, longing, imagining the taste. Vendors shout, offering a rainbow of delights. Each confection, each sugared morsel, is a tiny story of desire and compromise. You reflect on the rhythm of consumption. Sugar as reward, sugar as distraction, sugar as survival. It fuels labor, eases hardship, and subtly erodes health. The city thrives on it. Bodies teeth, and stomachs adapt or suffer quietly. Finally, the sun sets, golden and soft, glinting off chocolate bars, sugar ribbons, and marzipan creations. You walk home, your coat lightly dusted with powdered sugar from a careless nudge, feeling simultaneously alive and sticky. For a moment, the world tastes sweet, despite everything, but you know the sweetness is fleeting. The cost unseen lingers, and yet, inevitably, you crave another taste tomorrow. Rain drizzles down thin and grey, pooling in the uneven cobblestones as you make your way toward the bustling meat markets of East London. The air is pungent, a complex symphony of iron, brine, sweat, and smoke. You weave through the throngs of workers, housewives, and street children, each drawn to the promise of cheap protein, or scraps that could stretch a family's dinner. The butcher stalls are a study in both abundance and peril. You pause to watch a man expertly cleave a joint of beef, the knife flashing under gaslight. He tosses offcuts into a bucket, which will later be sold as mince or incorporated into pies. The meat is fresh today, glistening, the fat creamy, white and inviting. But a few stalls down, the slabs look grey and dull, edges curling, preserved with borax or soda to maintain appearance. A mainstream historical fact. Inspectors found that by the 1850s, up to 1/3 of London meat sold in markets was adulterated to extend shelf life or improve colour. You step closer to a small stall where a woman is preparing potted meats. She stirs the pasty mixture in copper pots, smells it, and nods with satisfaction. The smell is heavy but comforting, stewed meat, fat, and herbs. But her secret is in the filler breadcrumbs, flour, sometimes chalk or other stretchers. To a customer it looks full, substantial, and satisfying. To a historian it's evidence of necessity, innovation, or mild deceit. Historians still argue whether this practice was morally repugnant or simply survivalist ingenuity. Nearby, a young boy peeks into a barrel of pickled herring. The brine glistens with unnatural green and yellow hues. You recognize copper salts and lead acetate from your previous wandering. He dips a finger and tastes. His face wrinkles, but he swallows anyway. Hunger is the great teacher here. You can learn courage and caution all at once. The smells shift as you walk. Frying fat mingles with raw meat and vinegar. Steam rises from pots of cow heel soup, a common street dish designed to nourish cheaply. It smells faintly gelatinous, vaguely unappetizing to those unused to it, but full-bodied and rich. You dip a spoon cautiously, savoring the warmth. Your tongue detects hints of flour and fat, stretches to make the portion go further. You notice a butcher, hosing down a stall with water from the river. The water is thick with silt and smells faintly metallic, but it's considered acceptable hygiene. Washing the floors and counters was more about appearance than sanitation. A fringe tidbit. Some butchers would even enhance meat color with iron salts or niter to make cuts look fresher. Customers judged quality by sight alone. You move toward a cart selling sheep's heads, a delicacy for the poor. The heads glisten in brine, a testament to preservation techniques, both ingenious and a little unsettling. You wonder how many have been treated with borax or soda, substances used to maintain texture and color. You remind yourself that necessity often outweighs risk when every penny counts. The streets are alive with negotiation. Housewives bargain for a few ounces of beef, a herring, a pound of suit. Men laugh and jab at each other, sharing scraps of gossip as much as sustenance. The energy is chaotic, the kind of chaos that feels almost alive under the grey drizzle. You pause at a stall selling blood pudding, a dense black loaf made from congealed blood and oats. A worker slices it thick and wraps it in brown paper. The smell is iron, rich, intense, and earthy. It's cheap, filling, and a vital source of protein for the working poor. You remember reading that Victorian children sometimes grew up almost entirely on such foods, their tiny bodies learning resilience in iron and gristle. Historians still argue whether reliance on cheap, adulterated meat contributed significantly to long-term health problems, or simply reflected the harsh realities of urban life. Your stomach churns with empathy and mild apprehension. You watch a woman hand a scrap of minced meat to her small daughter, who eats it eagerly, oblivious to danger and delighted by the flavor. The market hums around you. Vendors advertise their wares loudly, emphasizing freshness and value, even if they've doctored the truth. You hear shouts for ox cheek pies, pickled calves' feet, and beef kidney puddings. The list of edible oddities seeming endless. The diversity of offerings is staggering, yet the risk hides in plain sight. A boy points out a dog sniffing near a bucket of offal. The owner scolds it gently but doesn't shoo it away. Street dogs, scavengers by nature, thrive on scraps, embodying the city's own survival instincts. You note the parallel: the poor, the animals, and the city itself, all subsisting on whatever is available. You pause in front of a butcher who proudly displays veal cutlets. They gleam pink and perfect. He tells you that the meat is from the finest calves, though you suspect some has been injected with water or salts to improve appearance. Consumers see color, texture, and sheen. They do not see the chemistry behind the curtain. A peculiar sight catches your eye. A man in spectacles examines meat with a magnifying glass. He mutters to himself, scribbles notes, and seems lost in study. Food inspection is in its infancy, and pioneers like him will eventually push for legislation. But for now, the city eats largely at its own risk. By late afternoon, the rain eases, leaving the streets slick and reflective. You walk away, your boots leaving wet prints on the cobblestones. Behind you, the markets continue their rhythm, knives flashing, meat glistening, smells thickening, money changing hands. Life and danger coexist seamlessly in every bite, every slice, every haggled pound. You realize the markets are more than commerce. They are the pulse of the city, a complex web of survival, risk, ingenuity, and appetite. The food sold here might sustain, delight, or harm, often all at once. And for millions of Londoners, it does. Because what choice do they have? The gas lamps flicker on, and the market winds down. Vendors tally coins, scrape fat from boards, cover stalls. Tomorrow, it will start again. A cycle of hunger and ingenuity that defines the streets themselves. You walk home, a faint tang of blood, fat, and vinegar lingering in your senses, knowing you've glimpsed the precarious heart of the Victorian diet. Fog rolls thick over the East End as you trudge toward bakeries and sweet shops, drawn by the smell of yeast, sugar and warmth. It's morning again, and the city stirs with the faint groan of awakening. Steam drifts from ovens, curling into the chill like ghosts of the day ahead. You follow your nose, inhaling deeply. The scent of freshly baked bread both comforting and strangely urgent. You pass a small bakery where a woman pulls trays of balm cakes from the oven. The soft rolls puff up like little clouds, their tops glistening with butter. She slices one open and spreads a thick layer of treacle, offering it to a queue of laborers waiting outside. Each bite is dense, sweet, slightly bitter from the molasses, but filling enough to silence stomach complaints for an hour or two. But the sweetness carries a hidden history. Treacle, cheap and sticky, was often laced with additives like alum to preserve it and keep the color bright. A mainstream historical fact, Victorian bakers frequently stretched ingredients to meet demand, sometimes substituting cheaper flours or adding chalk to bulk out dough. Customers ate it eagerly, oblivious. You wander deeper into the bakery district. Shops advertise jam tarts, suet puddings, and rock candies, all piled high behind glass. Children press their faces to the panes, hands fogging the glass, eyes wide with longing. The sugar glistens under lamplight like jewels. A fringe tidbit: some confectioners used lead acetate in the syrup to make colors vivid, an ingredient now known to be toxic. But then, it was considered a mark of quality. You step inside a small shop selling gingerbread figures. The sweet, spicy aroma wraps around you. You bite one, feeling the dry, grainy texture and the punch of molasses. The confection is meant to delight, to charm, to offer a momentary escape from the grime outside. But the taste carries a faint metallic tang. Lead, perhaps. You shrug. Pleasure often comes with compromise. The baker, a stout man with flour, dusted arms, slices a currant loaf and hands you a piece. Its crust is dark, almost caramelized, and the fruit inside is soft and sweet. Keeps well, he says, for the week ahead. You nod. Preservation, again, is king. Sugar, once an exotic spice, is now a tool to extend life, color and appeal. Historians still argue whether the widespread consumption of sugar and preserved pastries caused long-term health crises, or if Victorian diets were merely a reflection of scarcity and necessity. You bite into a tart and feel the sugar coat your tongue, a fleeting joy masking a creeping risk. Outside, street children scamper between carts and doorways, trading bits of sweetbread for pennies. One boy waves a sticky hand, holding a half-eaten sugar cake.
Trader!
He shouts. Another hands over a crust of bread in exchange for a scrap of chocolate. The barter system here is vivid and immediate, a reflection of hunger, ingenuity, and desire. A young woman pushes a cart of candied fruits, arranging slices of orange, lemon, and cherry in neat rows. The colors are unnatural, glowing with syrup and sometimes a touch of vermilion. Children point, squeal, and tug at their mother's skirts. They do not see danger, just delight. You watch as a mother breaks a slice for her son. The boy devours it greedily, licking sticky fingers. You continue down the narrow street, drawn by the scent of paste and pies. Meat pies flank sweet options, a reminder of the blurred line between necessity and indulgence. Mince pies, sometimes filled with preserved meat or suet, are sold alongside cinnamon buns and treacle slices. The contrast between savory and sweet mirrors the dual nature of Victorian eating, survival and pleasure, intertwined. A peculiar sight catches your eye. A man pouring syrup over loaves of bread in a back alley. He whispers to the apprentices about color enhancement. The golden hue will make the bread look fresh longer. Lead or not, the color convinces buyers of quality. Appearance outweighs reality. You pause to watch a group of women sharing a sticky bun, the sugar glaze dripping onto the cobbles. They laugh, momentarily light, their laughter echoing off brick walls thick with soot. Food is a small joy in hard lives, ephemeral but precious. As dusk descends, the bakery windows glow amber. You see shadows of children with sugar, stained lips, Men with sticky fingers, mothers carrying parcels of pastry home. The streets, despite fog and grime, shimmer with indulgence and survival. And you realize, walking away, that sugar in Victorian London was never just a flavour. It was a mask, a promise, a fleeting comfort. It soothed, seduced, and subtly betrayed all at once. For millions, it was sustenance, pleasure, and hazard rolled into one sticky bite. Night drapes over the city like a velvet blanket, damp and heavy. You trudge through streets slick with rain, heading toward the milk and dairy vendors, a lifeline for families who cannot afford meat every day. The smell is faintly sweet and earthy, tinged with ammonia and hay, a reminder that milk comes from animals, not factories. The first stall you pass is a simple wooden cart, wheels squeaking as a young man lifts a metal pail of milk. He dips a ladle carefully, pouring into tin cups for waiting children. A mainstream historical fact. In Victorian London, milk was often unpasteurized, sold directly from cows or from intermediaries, and could harbor harmful bacteria. Yet for the poor, fresh milk was precious, sometimes their only protein source. You take a sip, creamy, slightly metallic, warm from the pail. It's nourishing, comforting, and terrifying all at once. You notice a sticker on the side of the cart, guaranteed pure. But you know better. Historians still argue whether the health risks of unpasteurized milk were fully understood at the time or largely ignored for economic reasons. Either way, the pail offers both life and danger. Further down, a woman tends a stall selling curds and whey, the remnants of cheese making. She scoops portions into small bowls for children who crowd her. The smell is tangy, sharp, almost sour, but alive. You watch as a boy dips his finger and tastes. His grin is immediate. The acidity masks imperfections. The curds are nourishing, cheap, and sometimes a little spoiled, but it is all the child knows. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some dairy vendors were rumored to dilute milk with water, sometimes adding chalk or starch to make it appear richer. The buyers often didn't notice, and some actually preferred it that way. Less fat, more volume, a way to stretch meager coins. The compromises of survival hide behind every ladle. You move to a cart where buttered bread with milk is sold, a staple breakfast for labourers. The bread is dense and slightly sour, the butter thinly spread, the milk warm and creamy. Children clamour for a portion. The vendor warns them to drink slowly. Too much unboiled milk can upset their stomachs. They ignore him, gulps quick and eager. You watch with a mixture of amusement and concern. A man at the corner, holding a tiny child in his arms, mutters about recent outbreaks of typhoid and diphtheria, both spread through contaminated milk. The risk is real, yet few alternatives exist. Some mothers mix tea with the milk to improve taste or reduce perceived danger. Survival often demands improvisation. You notice a small group of women stirring clotted cream in shallow pans, the golden skin forming on the surface. It's thick, luscious, indulgent. Some add sugar or a dash of treacle before serving it on bread or pastries. You dip a finger in. The taste is divine, almost scandalously rich, compared to the daily diet of most children in the streets. Historians still argue whether the consumption of dairy actually improved health, or if the risks often outweighed the benefits. But watching children sip milk, smear cream, and devour small pastries, you realize it isn't just nutrition. It's a ritual of pleasure, comfort, and social bonding. A curious scene catches your eye. A young boy carries a pail of milk down a narrow alley. A dog follows eagerly. The boy trips. Milk spills across the cobbles. He yelps. The dog laps quickly. Both the boy and the animal learn the harsh lesson of scarcity and speed. Survival is immediate. Mistakes are costly. Further along, you find a cart selling buttermilk, sour and tart, cheap and filling. The woman behind it laughs as a group of men sip from tin cups. Keeps you strong for the day, she says, and perhaps it does. Energy is gained in odd places, in slightly spoiled pints and in warmth. A fringe tidbit. In some poorer districts, milk was sometimes skimmed off for butter, then diluted and sold to the very families who could ill afford the fat, rich portions. Nutrition is not always equitable, and appearance can mask reality. You pause to watch children sharing sips, laughing despite hunger. Their hands are sticky with spilled milk, their lips smeared with cream. The scene is chaotic, messy, and human. It's a microcosm of the Victorian city itself, survival mixed with ingenuity, danger mixed with delight. As dusk deepens, vendors pack up, milk churns emptied, carts pushed into alleys. You linger, inhaling the faint scent of hay, cream, and iron. For millions of Londoners, these simple stalls provided life, sweetness, and risk in every cup. The city moves on, unceasing, alive, hungry, resilient. You step into the late afternoon drizzle, drawn toward the tea and coffee houses that have begun to dot the narrow streets like warm beacons. The smell of roasted beans and steeping leaves cuts through the damp fog, offering a reprieve from the smoke, soot, and fried aromas of the market. You step inside one such establishment, where the air is fragrant and the chatter low, almost conspiratorial. The room is small, tables crowded, with patrons hunched over steaming cups. The barista, a thin man with flour on his sleeves from another life, pours tea into delicate porcelain cups. You accept one. The aroma is floral, comforting, almost meditative. A mainstream historical fact, by the mid-19th century, tea had become widely available, not just a luxury for the wealthy. It was infused with sugar to please the masses, a habit that made sweet drinks a daily ritual, often masking the bitterness of social inequity. You take a sip, letting it swirl across your tongue. The warmth spreads through your chest, a gentle reassurance in a world of grime and hunger. Around you, patrons stir sugar into their cups like it's a lifeline, heaping spoons at a time, oblivious to the mounting dental consequences. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of sugar in tea and coffee accelerated dental decay, or if urban sanitation played a larger role. You can feel both truth and debate on your teeth as you swallow. Across the room, a young boy fumbles with a teaspoon, spilling sugar into a cup. The barista sighs, wiping the spill with a damp cloth, but his eyes twinkle. The child giggles nervously, tasting a bit of the sugar straight from the spoon. The flavor is intense, almost shocking, yet delightful. A microcosm of the Victorian obsession with sweetness. A fringe tidbit drifts into your mind. Some coffee houses would lightly adulterate beverages with chicory, roasted barley, or even small amounts of ground acorns to stretch supplies. The drink looked and smelled authentic, but caffeine content and flavor were altered. Patrons rarely noticed. Their palates were trained to expect sweetness, warmth, and the illusion of consistency. You wander toward the counter, where coffee brews in large copper urns, steam curling upward like pale smoke. The color is rich, the scent bold and earthy. Some patrons sprinkle sugar or condensed milk into their cups, producing thick, syrupy drinks. You take a sip, wincing slightly at the bitterness balanced by cloying sweetness. Comfort and risk are intertwined. The room hums with conversation. Laborers discuss wages. Shopkeepers gossip about the mayor. Women compare recipes. Children nibble sugar cubes from saucers. You notice the subtle social dance. Coffee houses were once male-dominated, but Victorian sweet drinks welcomed children, women, and the working class. It was a quiet democratization of leisure, indulgence, and habit. A small tray of candied ginger sits on the counter. You try one. Sharp, sweet, slightly medicinal. The sugar masks the pungency, creating a flavor that delights and deceives. It's easy to see why sweets were both comfort and compulsion. Children begged for them. Adults secretly enjoyed them. Even the most cautious found themselves seduced. You glance at a poster advertising lemon syrup, sold as a cure for everything from fatigue to melancholy. The label promises vigor, but the main ingredient is sugar, with a faint touch of citric flavor. You sip it anyway. It feels uplifting, almost magical. A curious thought, the boundaries between medicine and confectionery blur constantly. People trusted appearances, flavor, and the authority of the seller more than any scientific test. Historians still argue whether sweetened beverages in tea and coffee were socially liberating or quietly corrosive. You consider both as you observe a young girl balancing a cup and a sugar cube, spilling drops on her frock without a thought. Pleasure, convenience, risk, all present in tiny, sticky gestures. Outside, gas lamps flicker, streets darken, but the smell of roasting beans, boiling tea, and caramelized sugar lingers in your senses. Coffee houses close slowly, patrons lingering over conversation, sugar settling on their lips, warmth spreading through their bodies. Walking back into the damp evening, you feel the rhythm of consumption, the pulse of the city, and the persistent, invisible consequences of sweetness. Sugar has infiltrated every corner of daily life: food, drinks, medicine, and culture. It comforts, deceives, and bonds, all at once, leaving faint stains that linger long after the cup is emptied. Night has fully descended, and the gas lamps cast long, trembling shadows on the wet streets as you make your way toward confectionery fairs and street festivals, where sugar takes center stage in a carnival of light, smell, and sound. The aroma of boiled sugar treacle and caramelized fruit curls through the air, mingling with laughter and the occasional clang of a distant bell. You can almost taste the anticipation before you see it. Vendors line the streets, with carts stacked high with rock candy, toffee, and spun sugar, each piece glittering under lantern light. Children clutch pennies tightly, pressing faces to windows, eyes wide as they choose their prize. Adults linger too, drawn by nostalgia and the promise of indulgence. A mainstream historical fact: fairs and public markets were essential spaces for mass sugar consumption, making sweet treats available to all classes, not just the wealthy. It's here that sugar becomes both spectacle and necessity, entertainment and sustenance. You move closer to a stall where a man spins cotton candy over a large metal cone. The sugary threads form a fluffy, pastel cloud, almost unreal in their lightness. You try a bite, watching the delicate strands dissolve instantly on your tongue. The texture is magical, but the sweetness is overwhelming. Children squeal in delight, sugar-coating their fingers, their lips, their laughter. Yet the magic hides danger. You notice that some vendors use food dyes, brilliant reds and greens, achieved with substances like vermilion or copper salts. A fringe tidbit: these additives could be toxic, yet their vibrant colors were believed to indicate quality and freshness. Parents rarely questioned it. They were captivated by the spectacle, and the children were utterly bewitched. You wander past a stall selling marzipan animals, small, grotesque, but enchanting figures shaped like pigs, dogs, and birds. The smell is almond heavy, almost cloying. Children stare in awe, bargaining and laughing, unaware that sometimes chalk or starch was mixed in to bulk out the sweet treats. You chuckle softly, realizing that deception and delight dance together in the same sugar-coated hands. Nearby, a gingerbread man competition draws a crowd. Figures are decorated with icing and candied jewels. The vendor boasts that his creations are as bright as the sun. You inspect one gingerbread figure, noting the faint metallic sheen of the icing. Lead, maybe, possibly. But for the onlookers, the illusion is perfect, and reality is almost irrelevant. Historians still argue whether public fascination with sweets drove mass consumption, or if economic necessity pushed vendors to adopt such visually enticing tricks. You can see both forces at play in the faces of the children, sticky fingers clutching coins, eyes shining with desire. You pause at a stall offering toffee apples, their glossy red surfaces reflecting lamplight. The sugar coating cracks audibly as a boy bites in, juice mixing with molten sugar, pleasure and hazard coexist. The sugar is thick, sticky, nearly impossible to remove from teeth, and possibly adulterated with coloring agents. Yet the delight is immediate, undeniable. A group of adults gathers around a punch bowl, filled with syrupy drinks flavored with lemon and cherry. They sip slowly, savoring the warmth and sweetness. You note how sugar here mediates social interaction, bonding strangers and friends alike over shared indulgence. It's comfort, culture, and subtle manipulation rolled into one. The fair continues into the evening. Music from a small brass band drifts through the streets. Children run with sugar-laden fingers, laughing, while mothers watch carefully, calculating sugar intake versus happiness. You notice a man carefully stirring a vat of treacle pudding, its aroma rich and caramelized. Patrons crowd near, eager for a taste. Each spoonful is a momentary escape, fleeting but cherished, a fringe observation. Some stalls secretly added minute amounts of opiates or mild sedatives to sweets, especially for children who were fussy or restless. It was subtle, almost invisible, yet it helped vendors maintain calm crowds and encouraged repeat customers. The idea of pleasure and control intertwined with the sugar itself. As the night winds down, stalls begin closing. Steam rises from remaining carts, sweet and fragrant, mingling with the fog. Children clutch their spoils, reluctant to leave. You step back, noticing the glow of lanterns reflecting off wet streets, sticky hands, sugar-smeared lips, and fleeting joy. It's easy to see why Victorian London became synonymous with sugar. Streets, fairs, and shops pulse with the sticky sweetness of indulgence and survival. Here, pleasure, deception, culture, and danger are inseparable, bound together in crystalline threads of candy and syrup. And as you walk away, the lingering scents and faint metallic tangs cling to your senses, a reminder that sweetness is never simple. It nourishes, delights, and quietly endangers, all at once. The city hums softly under the early morning mist, and you find yourself drawn to the pharmacies and chemist shops, the hidden veins through which sugar flows in medicine as much as in sweets. You pass a narrow alley where the scent of herbs, alcohol, and faintly metallic powders mingles with lingering drizzle. Inside, glass bottles gleam on shelves, filled with liquids dark and light, some sweet, some bitter, all promising relief. You pick up a small bottle of cough syrup. Its deep amber hue glimmers in the gaslight. A mainstream historical fact. Many Victorian medicinal syrups were packed with sugar, alcohol, and sometimes opiates to soothe patients, especially children. The sweetness masked bitterness, the alcohol dulled discomfort, and the opiates provided a gentle sedative effect. Parents trusted these syrups, unaware of long-term consequences. You pour a spoonful and taste. Thick, sticky, sweet, and medicinal all at once. It coats your throat, leaving a burn softened by sugar. You notice a small label claiming, cures cough, colic, and sleeplessness. It's the promise of hope in a bottle, but also the quiet comfort of a substance that encourages repeat use. Historians still argue whether Victorian syrup addiction was widespread or largely anecdotal. But the allure of sugar is undeniable. You wander past shelves of lozenges and pastilles, neatly arranged by flavor: licorice, lemon, peppermint. They gleam like jewels, enticing children and adults alike. A fringe tidbit: some pastilles contained tiny amounts of opium or belladonna, believed to calm coughs or ease pain. They were sweets in every sense: pleasurable, dangerous, and socially sanctioned. A young girl enters, tugging her mother's skirt. She asks for sugar-coated pills to soothe a sore throat. The mother obliges. You watch the child pop one into her mouth. Her eyes light up at the sweetness, oblivious to the chemical cocktail behind the candy, like exterior. This is the genius and tragedy of Victorian medicine. Sugar hides medicine. Medicine hides sugar, and both hide potential danger. You move toward the counter where a chemist is mixing a batch of treacle tonic, stirring the thick black liquid until it gleams. It smells faintly burnt, oddly rich, and strangely comforting. Treacle was considered restorative, a remedy for anemia, fatigue, or melancholy. Adults and children alike drank it with faith and pleasure. You dip a finger and taste. It's sticky, slightly bitter, and intensely sweet. Historians still argue whether sugar in medicine genuinely improved health outcomes, or simply pacified patients and encouraged overconsumption. You sip a sample of syrup and reflect. It's both a comfort and a subtle instrument of control. The line between nourishment and indulgence, treatment and temptation, blurs with every spoonful. You notice a curious scene, a man meticulously labeling bottles with colored powders and sweet syrups. He whispers instructions to his apprentice about the perfect sweetness to disguise bitterness. Parents, children, and laborers rarely see the careful calculations behind each concoction, only the result: liquid relief. Flavored with sugar, deceptively pleasant, and sometimes slightly dangerous. Nearby, a window displays candied medicinal powders, tiny crystals in vibrant colors. Children press noses to the glass, enchanted by the rainbow of possibility. They imagine it as candy, unaware that these powders were designed as medicine first and entertainment second. The line between delight and danger is razor thin. Outside, rain glistens on the cobbles, carrying the faint sense of syrup, herbs, and iron. Children run past, clutching sugar, coated pills. Mothers walk home with treacle bottles tucked under arms, and the city moves steadily, a living testament to the union of pleasure, necessity, and risk. You pause, realizing sugar is no longer just food. It is medicine, culture comfort, and sedative, a silent orchestrator of daily life. It nurtures and deceives, delights and endangers, often simultaneously. The brilliance of its design is clear, and yet the consequences are subtle, creeping, and persistent, threading through the very fabric of Victorian existence. The streets are quiet now, fog curling around lampposts like ghostly ribbons, and you wander toward the final frontier of Victorian sugar, home kitchens, and private dining rooms. It is here, behind closed doors, that the genius and the quiet devastation of sweet indulgence reveals itself most intimately. The aroma of sugar, treacle, and baked delights drifts from kitchens, mixing with the faint smell of coal smoke and boiled vegetables, creating a comforting, yet insidious, atmosphere. You enter a modest home. The hearth glows, casting a warm amber light on a table piled with puddings, custards and jam-filled pastries. Mothers stir pots of thick custard, dusting with sugar until it glistens like liquid gold. Children hover nearby, faces eager, hands twitching towards spoons. A mainstream historical fact in middle and upper class households, desserts became a ritualized part of meals, especially after 1850, reflecting not only taste but status, tradition, and modernity. You taste a small spoonful of custard. Thick, sweet, comforting. But the sugar is heavy. It clings to your tongue, masking the subtle bitterness of overcooked egg. You realize that home indulgence mirrors street indulgence, delight mixed with danger, innocence bound with compulsion. Historians still argue whether domestic sugar consumption contributed more to long-term health problems than street vendors or industrial sweets. Both leave traces, both persist. A fringe tidbit: some Victorian families experimented with sugar substitutes or adulterants, adding chalk, starch, or even crushed biscuits to stretch supplies for the household. It was invisible, practical, and often ignored by children, blissfully unaware of the compromises. You watch a boy break open a small sugar loaf, gnawing at the hard cone with fierce determination. Sugar was sold in this solid form for home use, a ritualized practice involving patience, dexterity, and reward. The act of breaking and consuming the loaf was almost ceremonial. It left hands sticky, lips sweet, and minds buzzing. Elsewhere, women carefully coat fruits in sugar, preparing candied lemons and cherries for the table. The process is meticulous. Slices are blanched, boiled in syrup, and laid to dry. You notice that some syrup glimmers with unnatural brightness, a result of additives like lead or tin in the pursuit of perfect visual appeal. Children watch, fascinated by the sparkle, unaware that beauty comes with hidden cost. A man stirs a pot of treacle pudding, its thick aroma filling the room. He tastes it, nods in satisfaction, and sets it aside to cool. Treacle, once a medicinal staple, now blurs the line between food and comfort, medicine and indulgence. Adults and children consume it alike, often unaware of the slow, persistent toll on teeth, digestion, and overall health. Historians still argue whether domestic sweets, culture-reinforced social bonds more than industrial sweets, or whether it's silently propagated poor health outcomes. You realize it's both. Kitchens are sites of love, ritual, delight, and subtle hazard. The choices made here echo those in the streets, markets, and pharmacies, weaving a citywide narrative of pleasure and risk. Outside, the night is thick, the fog settling like a soft, damp blanket over the cobblestones. Children clutch spoons, mothers watch anxiously, and the smell of sugar lingers, a ghostly presence in the quiet. The genius of Victorian sugar is evident. It comforts, it delights, it seduces, it deceives. Every bite, every spoonful, every sticky finger carries both joy and consequence. And you walk home slowly, tasting the remnants of sugar on your lips, aware that its influence is far-reaching, persistent, and inescapable. From street stalls to kitchens, from pharmacies to tea houses, sugar has woven itself into the very fabric of life, a sweet, insidious companion shaping bodies, habits, and society itself. And word count to 300, word wind. Down the night deepens, soft and still, and you feel the city's heartbeat slow beneath the fog. The streets are quiet, the stalls closed, the lamps flickering gently, as if nodding in exhaustion. You breathe in the faint sweetness lingering in the air, the ghost of molasses, treacle, sugar dust, and it comforts you like a soft, familiar blanket. The day has been long, sticky, and overwhelming, filled with sights, smells, and tastes that linger in memory and on your tongue. You walk slowly now, your pace unhurried, noticing the damp reflections on cobblestones, the occasional drip of water from a gutter, the faint hum of distant life continuing quietly beyond the fog. The sugar-stained hands, candy-coated lips, treacle-smeared fingers you observed earlier soften in your mind, replaced by the gentle rhythm of breathing and footsteps. The danger and delight of the city feel distant, like a story half remembered in the warmth of bed. Every bite, every spoonful, every sticky encounter now settles into a gentle awareness. Sugar comforts, sugar delights, sugar deceives. It has shaped lives, small and large, left traces on teeth, in stomachs, and in the quiet corners of hearts and homes. But for tonight, that influence softens. You feel the lingering warmth of custard, the faint metallic tang of syrup. The comforting aroma of freshly baked bread fades slowly into memory, leaving only the quiet understanding of a world, both sweet and complicated. The fog curls one last time around the street lamps, and the city exhales. You feel the weight of history lighten, the pulse of life slow, and the sweetness of the night linger softly. Now, as the world rests, the lessons of sugar, indulgence, and quiet consequence settle with you, gentle and unhurried.